Welcome to part 4 of our series on the economics classic, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. And first of all, stocks. Okay, fine. This is the part where people fall asleep, but I'll be quick, I promise. So, the thing that we produce that is beyond our immediate consumption is called capital. Merchants have two kinds of capital. The first kind is what we call circulating capital, and that's the impermanent capital, like money, that is reinvested into the company to maintain its revenue. The second part is what we call fixed capital, which usually comes in the form of property and machinery. They're both necessary if there's going to be any capital accumulation. But fixed capital always needs circulating capital being reinvested, like the maintenance of the machinery, to yield any revenue at all. Now, using that as a useful segue, labour. And Smith here is making perhaps an arbitrary distinction between two different kinds of labour: productive labour and unproductive labour. For Smith, productive labour is that which produces tangible goods. Consumer goods, such as food, or capital goods, such as machinery, that we can actually physically see and touch. As opposed to unproductive labour, which produces intangible goods and services. Examples of unproductive labourers include priests, the intellectuals, street performers. They only produce psyche satisfaction that you can't even measure. And then he even cites soldiers, whose product, defence, you can't see or touch, but nonetheless you could argue makes the whole market system work, because without defence you have nothing. On the face of it, it does seem a bit weird to label all of those things as unproductive. Most people feel like they're getting some satisfaction from a mime artist, even though you can't really prove it, or it can't be measured by something like GDP. I think if Smith were to admit that these things really are productive, then he would have to admit that value truly is subjective. But we shouldn't look too much into this, because what he's basically saying is here that the wealth of a nation comes from its productivity and not its consumption. It's just that it's a little ambiguous here as to what production actually is. Let's say you could divide the economy into two parts, the country and the town. In an unhampered market economy, the country and the town will specialise into different things. Usually the case is the country will provide subsistence to the town, and the town will provide consumer goods for the country. You cannot say that one side is stiffing the other. In a normally functioning economy, the town trades with the country because it perceives it will be beneficial. And this is yet another example of how specialisation increases the overall wealth of a country. Why then do we in 18 see it as somehow not beneficial for the West to trade with China? Why would it be bad for China to produce consumer goods and for us to produce services like information technology? It just so happens that it's more beneficial for us to specialise in things like financial services and IT. And there are many decent reasons why factories are closing down in the West and popping up in the East. Labour and capital costs are rising. The success of Donald Trump has prefaced the resurgence of what we call protectionism. This is a form of government intervention in the economy that protects certain industries against foreign competitors. They do this through things like tariffs on foreign goods. That means any foreign producer wishing to sell products in our country has to pay a fee. This is clearly a bad thing, and you would recognise it if you've been reading Adam Smith. If you see that it's beneficial for the country to specialise and then trade with the city, then you can see why it's beneficial for us to specialise and then trade with China. If the former increases the overall wealth of a nation, then the latter must increase the overall wealth of the world. Now the next part is so unrelated to what we've just been talking about, I have no idea how to segue it. Anyway, we're going back to post-Roman Empire and the feudalism of Western Europe. In such societies, a very few select number of people had huge swaths of land. This was granted to them by generational privilege, and those that worked on them were called serfs. The product of their labour was mostly confiscated by their landlord for themselves. So what's the difference between this and the modern capitalist system? In feudal times, the owner of the land acquired their property through conquest or being a relative or an influencer of some monopolist. They didn't buy the land or homestead it. When people have homesteaded the land, they have a personal stake in it. Smith notes that feudal lords don't have the same incentive to invest in their own land, because they know that no matter how productive they are, their wealth never really is at risk of being diminished. The capitalist, on the other hand, knows that the land requires continuous investments to maintain their income, especially with competitors breathing down their necks. No improvement of quality of life can be had if land is just parcelled out to some well-connected aristocracy. In Smith's time, people were seeing a radical change in society, from one where wealth was statically in the hands of a privileged few to one where wealth actually increased overall and was distributed to those who could most provide for others. For the previously underprivileged, owning property was a revolutionary force. Smith was one of the first well-known public intellectuals of the time to actually give credit to the merchant class. It helps in this situation that he was Scottish. Presumably, he didn't have as many aristocratic friends to impress. The English upper classes, on the other hand, were scornful of traders, and generally anybody who worked for a living. It was Smith and others' explanation of this phenomenon that helped inspire the repeal of the Corn Laws, which in turn helped spur the Industrial Revolution, lifting millions out of penury and poverty. We're really getting on with Wealth of Nations so far. We'll see how it goes. There may be 1 or 2 videos left. In any case, please keep following the page, and thanks for watching. Please comment and let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. This has been James Smith for Life. See you next week.